This will be a speech in English, because Paola is one of the researchers at IPI who have brought some kind of international perspective into problems that we deal with here in the north part of Sweden. Jag ska också säga det att ursprungligen var det ju Malin Eriksson som skulle ha ett föredrag om integration och den problematiken. Hon kommer att ge ett sådant seminarium som vi kommer att webbsända vid senare tillfälle. Och då kommer alla som är med här på den här konferensen att få den länken så att man har möjlighet att kunna titta på det seminariet vid ett senare tillfälle. Varsågod Paola.
Tack så mycket. Hello everyone. My name is Paola Mosquera. I'm a Marie Curie International Incoming postdoc at the department. And I have been working in my country during the last 8 years in the field of health inequalities. So perhaps you are wondering right now how a Colombian ended up being in northern Sweden. Well, so as you should already know, Sweden is worldwide recognized for the quality of the health system interventions and also for the uniqueness of the data you have here. So I thought, why not to make an exchange, learn new insights, and also give some perspectives, different perspectives, to the problem of health inequalities. So here I am. That's how I ended up here, trying new approaches to research that are impossible to conduct in my country because of the limitation of data, but that is possible here, what in the undeveloped world we call the paradise of data. So, what I'm going to present now is the ongoing project that is the focus on applying a life course approach to the analysis of socioeconomic inequalities in cardiovascular disease in northern Sweden. This project is an example of how the richness of your data can be used not just to understand better the problem of health inequalities, but also for policy and practice. So, a little bit of a context and how this idea of a project came to us was that although cardiovascular disease is improving in Sweden, the social inequalities in cardiovascular disease are instead steady or increasing. There is a lot of research that have established already that the social determinants, the lifestyle, and the life course are important to understand and to predict the cardiovascular outcomes. However, when it comes to income inequalities, there is not as much developed. For example, we don't know how the inequalities evolve during the aging process. We don't know if the inequalities are rooted in the past. So, or if they are simply an expression of the current conditions. Most of the research has been done in this field is using cross-sectional data. So in this case, we are going to try something different. So, our focus here is the income inequalities in cardiovascular disease in the middle age, and the purpose is to understand this from a life course perspective. So, starting in the present, our first question is, what are the current social, lifestyle, psychosocial determinants of these current income inequalities in cardiovascular disease? Do they differ between women and men? So once we think on our present, then we move to the future. And then we ask, how do these inequalities evolve? And do the determinants of these inequalities change while we are aging? And then we just think backwards. Are these inequalities explained by our childhood conditions? So, as I just mentioned, this is an example of how your data can be used for this unique research. We have been using the information from a very successful health intervention that you have here in the region, the Vasterbotten intervention program. This information, the survey information, and the health measures that are taken during the health examinations part of the program has been linked to the register data from Statistics Sweden by the Umeå lab. So, what we have done is to measure health inequalities, both in cardiovascular disease and in cardiovascular risk factors. We have been calculating concentration indexes. This is a summary measure that describes if the inequalities are concentrated among the rich or among the poor. These concentration indexes can take values between 1 and -1. If the index is negative, that means that the outcome is concentrated among the poor people, while the opposite is true if the concentration index is positive. If the concentration index is 0, that means that there is perfect equality. So once we calculate the concentration indexes, we proceed to decompose these concentration indexes. And what this specific methodology does is that help us to explain the health inequalities, but the determinants that are underlying these inequalities. So as a result of this methodology, we can get the absolute and the relative contribution of each of the inequalities that has been measured. So let's go back to our questions, and then let's start for our present. So, some things to think about. Perhaps you can think on that yourself, and as you know the data, you also have some answers for these questions. So, who has worse cardiovascular health? Women or men? Who makes more money? Women or men? Is there any other socioeconomic differences between women and men in the region? And do you think that these factors are related to the inequalities that we're going to find in our current present? So let's move to what we did and to what we found. So for this particular question, we used a sample of 12,000 VIP participants that were 40 to 50 years in 2008, 2009, and 2010. First of all, what we found: women are healthier than men, have better health profiles, but they earn less. Women are more educated, but they participate less in managerial positions. So, as a result of this distribution, what we found was that the inequalities in the 8 biological cardiovascular risk factors measured in the VIP program were larger among women than among men. So what you have in this figure, the dark blue are women and the light blue are men. So the inequalities were larger in all cardiovascular risk factors in women, except for glucose regulation and blood pressure. The biggest inequality were in BMI and abdominal obesity, followed by the blood lipids. But what explains these inequalities? What determinants are behind these measured current inequalities? So we found that there are different patterns according to the risk factor we are measuring, but also different patterns between men and women. We found that socioeconomic conditions are the most important factor explaining these inequalities, but the income is the more important for women, while education is the more important for men. The second group of factors explaining these inequalities were the behavioral factors. And here the physical activity was the contributor, and it was equally important for both women and men. Tobacco and alcohol consumption was more important on explaining the inequalities among men than among women. And the family conditions and psychosocial factors were more important for men. Any surprises? No. Okay. So now let's move forward and think in the future. Let's consider that we are growing old, so we are moving from 40 to 60 to 70 and 80. And let's think what happened during this time that could change the panorama of health inequalities. Well, people move into retirement and they become more reliant on the welfare system. So, can this change the inequalities? Are the inequalities will be stable or are they going to increase with time? To answer this question, we used a cohort composed by 44,000 participants of DIP that were 40 to 60 in 1990 and that who has participated in the program at any point. Here, our outcome was the cardiovascular disease measured as the first hospitalizations, and we then divide the periods so we can see this transition during the ages and also during the time. So, as you can see in these figures, the first one to your left, yes, the first one to your left is the starting point when people was between 40 and 64. And then in this particular point, we can see that the situation is quite equal for this particular population. So the concentration curve just reached the line of equity, indicating that this is a point in which the inequalities are very low. So in fact, the concentration index is very close to zero. So, but when we see the transition of these figures, you can also observe that the concentration curves just lie further and further from the line of equity. And we can also confirm that through the concentration indexes that are increasing during the time. So we can see here that the inequalities are increasing as the time passes and the population aging. And what explains this? What is this black future for us, for you? So, well, we found that there is a shift a life course shift in the factors explaining these inequalities. So things don't remain the same. There are some factors that are important at the beginning, but that they are not important at the end. So we found first income, which is the orange portion of the figure. Income is continuously important along the life for these inequalities. However, education and employment decreased in importance. So these ones are the gray and the purple ones. So you can see that in the three first periods, they are there, but anyway, in the last one, they disappear. So changes in the labor market are not as important at the end of life as income. Age, of course, is increasing in importance, which is expected because we were analyzing people that was growing old. Immigrant status, family conditions, geographical areas, they were of lesser importance for these inequalities, for these emergent inequalities in all population. Well, so now that we know that this future is not very promising regarding the inequalities, let's go back and try to answer if the current inequalities are or not associated with our childhood conditions. So let's think on that. To answer this question, we use the same population for the first analysis, so the 12,000 sample. And what we did was to connect the information of current socioeconomic conditions with the socioeconomic condition of this population at the age of 12. And this was measured through their parents' socioeconomic conditions. We run here 3 different decomposition analyses. So the first one was only with the income and education from the parents. Then we add some other socioeconomic conditions from the parents also, unemployment, sick benefits, civil status, nationality, some others. And then in a third decomposition we include both childhood conditions and current socioeconomic conditions. So the first thing, the outcome here was the metabolic syndrome. So the first thing to mention here is that again, women have larger inequalities than men. You can see that the proportion of the bar is longer for women than for men. In the first model for women, when we include only education and income from the parents, we found that these factors explained around 9% of the inequalities, the current inequalities. When we include some other socioeconomic conditions, I mean the unemployment and sick benefits, civil status, nationality, this slightly increased to 10% explanation. And when we include then the concurrent conditions in the year of participation in the program, so then this contribution of the childhood conditions remain in 6%. So, what we thought is that this explanation is analogous to what is understood as a sensitive period, meaning that for women, the childhood conditions explain the socioeconomic inequalities in the current time by an independent, making an independent contribution. The case for men was a little bit different. So with the first model, only with education and income from the parents, the explanation was around 7%. When we include the other socioeconomic conditions from the parents, this increased very small points. But then when we include the current socioeconomic conditions, this contribution disappeared. So then, this is what in life course model is known as could be explained as what in the life course is understood as social chain of risk. That means that there is some transmission of the inequality that leads to the current result. So some wrap-up conclusions about our findings. First, health inequalities are generally greater in women than in men. Health inequalities increase with aging, and labor market play a receding role, while aging play an increasing and income unstable role. And 7 to 10% of the health inequalities are rooted in parental conditions during upbringing. How do I translate this into policy implications? What do I do with this information? What kind of decisions or policy making can do with this information? I want to give 4 clear messages for you to take with you today. The first one, reduce income inequalities and address the woman structural disadvantage is a priority. Second, targeting early life, inequalities in early life, may prevent part of the health inequalities decades later. Third, welfare policies, especially pension system and elderly care, should prevent inequalities to widen in all ages. And last but not least, the social inequalities cannot be seen as a static problem. This is a dynamic problem. social inequalities are an illness of the society that can be transmitted generation to generation. And that's why it's important that for policy and practice, a combination of life course and equity lens are applied to all healthcare interventions. Yeah, thank you very much.